brothers and my sisters, my divine honor and privilege to be here with you today. And as I see, they put me here because if you give a black preacher a cordless mic, I'm going to holler and call my key. And so therefore, I just needed to kind of be easy and be zealous so I can hit my 5-minute mark. If you will allow me, in our time together as we're dealing with this whole concept of race and trauma, I just want to kind of shape context for kind of what brought me here, or context for my thoughts in this kind of moment, in this race and trauma. 1963, George Wallace in his gubernatorial address gave the words that everyone has heard: segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. It's an interesting thing though, because that wasn't the first time he ran for governor of the state of Alabama. The 4 years before he ran in the Democratic primary against the state's Attorney General, John Malcolm Patterson. Patterson had been endorsed by the KKK, an organization that Wallace had actually spoke against. Wallace was endorsed because he was kind of a mid-range candidate by the NAACP. Wallace endorsed by the NAACP, and he got beat by 34,000 votes. Over 34,000 votes. As at the end of the election, he was walking with his aide, Seymour Trammell, and Seymour Trammell called him saying, "You know why I lost this race?" He said, "Because I was out-niggered by John Patterson, and I will never be out-niggered again." 4 years later, you see George Wallace runs, and George Wallace runs on a hardline segregationist stance, and he ends up winning the election. George Wallace later on went and said, "I tried to talk about good roads and good schools and all these things that have been a part of my career, and nobody listened. And then I began talking about niggers, and they stomped the floor." In this current cycle, when we talk about race and trauma in the United States, you cannot talk about race and trauma and not talk about what it means to be living in the age of Trump. You cannot talk about a candidate that out-niggered everybody. You cannot deal with the fact that Trump got in off of birtherism. You cannot deal with the fact that Trump got in off of otherism. You cannot deal with what it means to liberate evangelicalism without dealing with the fact that from street corners to southern borders, Trump out-niggered everybody. He didn't just out-nigger everybody, but he did it under an ecclesiological framework of the evangelical church. And so there's no way that you can talk about liberating evangelicalism when much of the trauma that has happened right now. Every Sunday morning when I get in front of my church, I'm looking at a room of untreated trauma. Every single Sunday morning, I'm dealing with a room of trauma, some personal trauma, but much institutional trauma, some trauma that is happening through the government, some trauma that is happening. And so we're dealing with all of this trauma, and I have to deal with the fact, as we're talking about liberating evangelicalism, that much of the institutional trauma that has been happening has been done under the shadow of the evangelical church. And so if you're going to talk about liberating evangelicalism, you're going to really have to deal with what is evangelicalism. And you're going to have to navigate and deal with the fact that when you talk about evangelicalism, to most of us, we see white evangelicals. We see white evangelicals, and we see how they line up with Trump. We see how they line up with the trauma that's been perpetrated against our folks. And so there's a need for us to be able, if we are even going to be able to talk about liberating evangelicalism, that we're going to have to deal with how do we navigate the trauma that we are seeing and the trauma that the own phraseology deals with when we talk about it. I buried more friends in my youth than I've got fingers and toes to count. The folks in my congregation have buried more friends than they've got fingers and toes to count. Last week I was called to be at a hospital to be able to take a young man off of life support who had been shot 14 times at the age of 16. Before that week was out, I was called to another hospital. This is the trauma that we're seeing on a day-by-day basis. If we're going to liberate evangelicalism, we're going to have to deal with what does it mean to be in a nation in which folks, when you start niggering, start to stomp the floor. When they hear it, they stomp the floor. When the church hears the dog whistle of nigger, they've been stomping the floor. My time is up. Bless you.